Alright, this is Demand 6 with How to Make a Mask Part 3, Mold Making. Okay, here's what we need. Something to support your armature, some rubber gloves because our liquid latex material, it does stick to your skin and it's a real pain to get off. Then you need some measuring cups, a plastic spoon, and something to mix it in. After that, we're going to use Oomoo 25, it's made by Smooth Cast, and that's going to be our latex material. The way Oomoo works is it comes in two parts, A and B. You have to mix equal parts. I use 1 tablespoon for each, and that'll give us about 2 tablespoons worth of material. You don't want to use more than that in one go because it's really watery, so it's just easier to handle when you have a smaller amount. It doesn't harden fast, so you have plenty of time to mix more as you're doing this, so don't worry about that. Mix it to this dark blue color, and once that's done, just pour it over, and don't be afraid to use the spoon to smear it around. You want to get every premise, and you want it to be thick. I think I use about total 6 tablespoons worth of silicone in this, so I had to mix about 3 times. So don't be afraid to just glomp it on. And I'll point out, if your mask has a lot of detail, like on mine at the curves, that'll make a sharp point. The silicone's not going to want to stay there. I have to keep applying it over and over. So it is a little tedious, but in the end, you will get the result you want. And that's about it. Actually, here's a word of warning. You see how I have my armature supported so it's not really touching the table? If you let it touch the table, the silicone will kind of like group there, and it might get underneath your armature. You do not want that to happen. It'll cause a lot of problems. Like if it gets on the inside, you have to go in with a knife, cut it out. It's a pain. Aside from that, that dripping on the side, that will actually help us later. I'll show you as we're making the clay walls. And you don't need to worry about the silicone. It won't stick to anything. That's the great part about silicone. It sticks to nothing. So your tools in the end, if you bought like real fancy tools and you're afraid that they're going to get ruined, don't wash it while the silicone's still wet. Let it actually harden on your tools, and then you can just peel it off. It's kind of like Jello in the end. Doesn't stick to anything. You won't have a single problem. And that's about it. Great. I actually spoke for a whole clip without playing any music. I'm impressed with myself. Now, don't be afraid of using the drippings, because you really don't want to waste this stuff. However, I did use the cheapest materials possible. Now this is the hardened version. As you can see, it still looks kind of liquidy, and it didn't go past the edges. That's good. Now let's go on to clay walls. Okay, this is how I start the clay walls. You see that box that I drew around the mask? That's how I know how far to make the clay walls. That's about a 7-inch by 9-inch box. Now you can pretty much fill that with any type of clay. I'm using terracotta. The thing is, you just want a clay that's not going to harden immediately, that's soft, that's easy to use. You want something that you can quickly shove in, use it, and then if you have to, throw it out. Terracotta was cheap where I bought it, that's why I have it. It won't stick to the mask or anything, but it will hold in the amounts of, plaster that we're going to dump on top of this to give it more strength. Now the reason I'm making the clay walls this way by actually making a sheet of clay underneath the armature is because I'm doing a half mask. If I was doing a full head mask, I probably would just make a small wall around it. But for a half, this is a whole lot faster and easier. So just make a thin sheet underneath, and as you'll see, I'm making the little walls to contain the plaster. And in a little while, you're going to see me add this little thing to the side. That's just to add some support, because you don't want to risk the walls falling down, because then they'll make a huge mess. But aside from that, do you remember those little ridges on the silicone from the drips when we first applied that? That's actually going to help us in this. That's going to dig into the clay, and that's going to help us because that means we don't have to push on the mold as much to actually get it to sink into the clay. It'll make things a whole lot easier. Now when you are pushing your armature into the clay, you don't want to push too hard because you might end up changing your design. That'd be really bad at this point. So be careful and tread lightly. Now before we go on to the next step, which is the plaster, there's one thing. If you want to save your clay to be able to use it again, if you're using a water-based clay, you should apply something like a mold release, Vaseline, just something that is a layer between the clay and the plaster. I didn't bother doing that because the terracotta I'm using is extremely soft. It'll peel right off no matter what I put on it. So if you want to do that, that's up to you. But it will make your life a little bit easier. Okay, this is Plaster of Paris, otherwise known as Paris scrap. I'm going to be using this to add some strength to our mold. Instead of Paris scrap, some people do use burlap, or you can just use an old t-shirt or cloth and just tear it up and use that. But in the end, you're just going to be placing that on top of the first layer of plaster just to give it a little bit more extra strength. Okay, on to the mixing. Now I'm using about 2 cups of water and about, I don't know, maybe, I don't really measure it, just about, I don't know, 1 cup of plaster and maybe 4 tablespoons of plaster. Well, whatever. It tells you the measurements on the back of the box. But here's the important thing. When you first mix it, it's going to be like that, really watery, almost like milk. If you're like me and you want to use it when it's a bit thicker, stop stirring it once you get all the chunks out. Leave it for about a minute and it'll get kind of like dip. If you're not sure on the timing, just leave it in the bucket for a little while and just tilt the bucket once in a while. And as you see that it stops moving as much as water, then you know that's the time to use it. Apply it quickly. You want to kind of drip it on. Then you can smudge it as I am in the video. And after that, that's when you're going to start using your Plaster of Paris or burlap or whatever you're going to use. Just dip it right into the plaster. It won't do anything, it just makes it stronger. Aside from that, after you're done with that second layer or whatever you're using to strengthen it, do another layer of plaster. You will have to mix more of it, that's okay. All in all, from start to finish, I think I used about 4 cups of water. So that was about 3 layers of plaster. The first layer, then the strengthening layer, and then the final coat. So now I guess I'll just play some music as you watch me finish with the plaster. And that's the final step of mold making. Okay, since I have some extra time waiting for this to finish, I'll say a few things. If you're looking at the clay wall and you're thinking, oh, Demonge did a really ugly job on that, it looks horrible. Don't worry, the clay is going to disappear. You're going to remove that. That'll be the next step in the demolding. So, don't worry if the clay wall looks a little, well, shitty. It doesn't matter. It's only going to be there till the next morning after the plaster hardens. After that, we'll start casting. And after that, all you have to do is paint and you're pretty much finished with your mask. Wow. I think I'll actually be able to finish this in 4 parts. I'm kind of shocked. I really can't believe it. I got through a whole video with talking, no music at all. Damn. I guess that shows how important the molding part is. Okay. Well, look forward to part 4. Thanks for watching.